Welcome to the 2 Comma Club, Why a Million Ain't What It Used to Be. By way of introduction, my name is Monique Madan, and I'm the Head of Financial Life Strategies at UPotential and ETF Capital Management. I'm a certified financial planning professional, financial management advisor, and a chartered financial divorce specialist. Before we begin, let me briefly explain what a fee-for-service financial planner does. To be perfectly frank, sometimes it's easier to tell you what I don't do rather than what I do, but in a nutshell, I help you understand how your wealth can translate into the life that you want to lead. I don't sell any investments. I don't sell any insurance. My work involves understanding what's important to you, projecting your current financial situation into the future, and then comparing the two to see if your goals are feasible. I do this by starting off with a microscopic understanding of your income and expenses and then projecting that into the future. I start with analyzing these, determining if you can maintain your current standard of living for the rest of your life, and if my projections indicate that you might run short, I then offer options and strategies such as budgeting guidelines and tax planning to help get you closer to your goal. Together, these projections then provide me with a 30,000-foot overview of your financial situation so that I can help you make good decisions no matter what life throws at you. I can help you prioritize, create wealth, reduce debt, protect your families from risk, access your wealth tax efficiently, and satisfy your estate ambitions through charitable giving and estate planning. At UPotential, you decide your goal and we'll help you get there. UPotential is all about giving you an understanding of how much you can afford to spend and then challenging you to turn that budget into the best life possible. Want to save for your children's education? Oh, great. I'll coach you on how that will fit into your overall financial strategy. Want to leave a significant estate to your children? Terrific. I'll give you the upper limit of what you can spend each year to accommodate that goal. Instead, if you want to spend your last dollar the day that you take your last breath because you feel like you've already given your children everything you could and now it's your turn, well, I can walk you through that also. The bottom line being that no single solution would be best for everybody. I really just have to get to know you, your values, your opportunities and constraints before I can give you any really good advice. So let me start off with a short story. When I was 16, I was a counselor at a summer camp, and I was smitten with this boy from Boston. He would tell anyone who sat still long enough that he was going to make $1 million by the time he was 30 and that he would retire by the time he was 50. I can honestly tell you that prior to meeting him, it never occurred to me that there would be some target amount of money that would make me feel rich or successful. Now, flash forward several years, and during an initial consultation with a new client, I asked her what she wanted to accomplish with her wealth. What had she put all those years of work into to accumulate? Now, what is that going to translate into? And so she said that she wanted to be a 2 comma gal. And it's a term I'd never heard before, and I've come to understand it means someone with $1 million of investable assets. There it is again, this notion that a particular figure, specifically $1 million, was a goal that could mean success or that you'd achieved some elite level of wealth. Apparently, this client and others believed that $1 million would translate into a secure and meaningful retirement. So I went about studying to determine whether this arbitrary figure actually translated into an affordable budget that most people could use to achieve their goals. Now, as you probably know, retirement planning is more like a juggling act than it is like a formula. There's an amazing and dizzying array of factors that can affect how much you need to save to live the way you want to in retirement. You have to consider the lifestyle that you want to lead, whether you're one of those lucky few people who still has an employer-sponsored pension, Will you be carrying any debt into retirement? Have you accumulated your wealth to be tax efficient? Are you willing to downsize your home to support your lifestyle? How important is capital preservation for you? Do you want to leave a substantial estate rather than living well now? Are you single, or am I worrying about two people? And finally, do you have a medical history of either prolonged or protracted longevity? Now, of all these factors, the very most important is the first one. What sort of lifestyle do you want to live? To do that, you have to have a grasp at what you're spending now. Look amongst the closest people to you in life and you'll see that $1 million could be plenty to some people and not nearly enough to others. Maya Angelou famously said, "You can't really know where you're going until you know where you've been." So, to determine how much capital you will need to accumulate for retirement, we need to know how much you are spending now. And I can tell you this much, very few people do. Quantifying your current lifestyle and challenging you to think about how much your future lifestyle in retirement is going to cost may be one of the most important and informative analyses that I do during my initial consultations. Now, some planners will aim to replace 60 to 70% of your current lifestyle as an estimate of how much you would need during retirement. And certainly there's some sense to that. You don't need to maintain a work wardrobe anymore. You're not going to need to commute. And there are certain life conveniences like prepared foods you might not need to rely upon quite as strongly. However, in my experience, unless you're moving to a less expensive part of the country, or you're already well traveled and don't enjoy expensive hobbies like golf or eating out, you're probably looking at roughly the same costs that you spend now, albeit, of course, reallocated in different ways. One client recently cleverly mentioned this idea of a three-tiered retirement: the go-go years, the no-go years, and the slow-go years. But not quite in that order, sorry about that. First off, the go-go years can kind of be characterized as a time where you're catching up on the things that you didn't have time to do while you were working full-time. This could be expensive leisure activities and travel, and I can tell you that this can easily replace and sometimes even eclipse the costs of your pre-retirement lifestyle. Moving on, as we age, you get to the slow-go years, where you still might be traveling, but more likely snowbirding, where you would spend an extensive stay in a particular place. At that point, things like travel insurance and a companion might end up being very, very costly. Or for that matter, you might just have, grandchildren locally that you want to spoil rotten. And then ultimately, and this might be the most important, the no-go years can be wrought with the costs of personal support, such as housekeeping or medical costs, which in my opinion really aren't avoidable. So the goal during these years, as I discuss this with clients, is really about preserving independence for as long as you can and preserving your dignity. And I don't think anyone would argue that that's probably the most important of all. Now, because we don't know what our lifestyle will cost and what challenges lay ahead, I've coined this phrase, the maximum sustainable budget. This is a calculation of the highest amount a household can spend monthly or yearly without running out of investments before age 90. Now, I pick my words very carefully there, without exhausting your investment resources, because I do the calculation based on preserving your home equity if you're a homeowner for the costs of private nursing care, assisted living, or for distribution through your estate. This calculation is also inflation adjusted, which means that the same goods and services that you can enjoy now, you will be able to enjoy as you age into the future. So let's look at an example. I've performed a simulation of a 50-year-old adult living in Ontario. He earns very well, around $145,000 per year, and like many, his only savings is that he maximizes his RSP contributions. He spends everything else. In the interest of being conservative, I've assumed he has a life expectancy of 92.5 years because that's kind of the average between genders at this point. Working backwards from his simulated take-home earnings, known payroll deductions, the fact that he's only optimizing his RSP, his standard of living essentially is about $82,700, which translates into $6,900 per month. So the goal then is to use his wealth and regular income streams to generate and ultimately draw down his wealth slowly over a number of years, 42.5 to be exact, without running out of money by age 92.5. Okay, so first things first, if he's accumulated $1 million by the time he's age 65, well, the standard of living that he can enjoy will be dependent on how that money is invested. If it's invested defensively, simulated here as a return on investment of 2.73% per year or 0.73% above inflation, then he can probably cover a standard of living of about $4,100 per month every month, increased for inflation until age 92.5. That represents about 60% of his goal. If he's willing to take a little bit more risk in a balanced portfolio, he gets to about $4,500 per month, 65% of his goal, or ultimately if he is tolerant enough to take 4.7% or growth mentality, which would yield a 4.7% per year return on investment, then he can get to about $4,800 per month or 70% of his goal. So first off, it doesn't seem as though the 2 comma club or $100 or $1 million rather in investable assets is necessarily enough. Now, keep in mind also that this includes maximum CPP and OAS entitlements. So to anyone listening who may be taking dividends from a private corporation in order to avoid contributing to the Canada Pension Plan, you'd have to save an additional $250,000 to $300,000 just to replace the CPP that you haven't paid into. Now here's where the fun starts. The magic of financial life strategies allows me to try different things to see if I can get you closer to your goal. So first off, let's talk tax. Not all income is created equal, so it's important to consider where your money is invested. With the client that I've simulated, he has been doing as good tax planning as he could by maximizing his RSP. He's a very, very high earner, so he really wanted those tax refunds, and the RSP would be where he'd get them. Unfortunately, as we get closer and closer to retirement, not only do we have to consider our current tax burden, but we also have to think of our future tax burden and how those relate to one another. If you're projected to be in a similar or even higher tax bracket in retirement, which by the way many diligent savers encounter, choosing to contribute to a tax-free savings account might be to your advantage. So what I did here is I simulated what if this client over the next 15 years to retirement chose to divert some of his savings to a tax-free savings account and accumulated $250,000 in the TFSA and $750,000 in the RSP by the time he gets to retirement. In this particular iteration, he gets 3 to 5% closer to his goal, attributed in large part because taking money out of a tax-free savings account does not affect your old age security, who, by the way, for those of you who might not know, is clawed back for high income earners. Now, another source of tax-efficient capital is obviously from your principal residence. If this particular client were willing to downsize his home and use some of the equity to cover expenses, he's going to get much, much, much closer to his goal. Depending on how that money is invested, he's now either 23% away from his goal in the defensive portfolio or as close as 13% to goal with a growth portfolio. So much, much closer. And we're not done yet. There are lots of other financial strategies that I have in my tool chest. Firstly, let's talk about when to convert your RSP to a RIF. Many people still retire at age 65, but always have it in their minds that they're not going to touch their RSPs until age 71 to optimize the tax deferral. And that's certainly a valid concern. But in some cases, it may be to your advantage to convert the RSP to a RIF earlier. For example, if you can project your tax burden into the future and you determine that in those early years pre-riffing, I mean, it's not exactly a verb, but you know what I mean, pre-riffing, you're going to be in a much lower tax bracket. Converting the RSP to the RIF or taking ad hoc withdrawals from your RSP mean that you're taking smaller amounts over more years, thereby spreading the taxes over more years. Or you might want to look strategically on when to collect your CPP and your old age security. Some people choose to collect CPP at age 60, adhering to the, bird in the hand idea that they'd rather have the money in their hand and collect less for longer. However, if you're collecting a workplace pension that includes a bridge benefit to age 65, your employer pension is already being notched higher in those pre-65 years. Therefore, taking CPP early is just adding to another layer of income to those other layers, being your annual lifetime amount and then your bridge benefit. Not only will taking CPP early permanently reduce your benefit, but now you're subjecting it to unnecessarily high taxation, and that's unwise. Perhaps the single most effective way that clients can reach their retirement income goals is through appropriate income splitting. As many of you know, just about all pension income can be split to one degree or another at one time or another. And this helps us by taking advantage of the lower tax bracket of the lower income spouse. But it has to be done strategically because specifically for RSPs, this is where RSPs are disadvantaged relative to employer-sponsored pensions. You can split a pension with a spouse as early as you start receiving it. You cannot split withdrawals from your RSPs until you're 65. You also can't get that tax benefit if it's within 3 years of the last contribution, if it's a spousal RSP. So you have to be very, very careful that these seemingly good strategies don't backfire. Lastly, while some people don't spend a whole lot of time trying to preserve OAS, I'm of the mind that if someone were offering me $600 a month that's indexed for inflation and payable for the rest of my life, I wouldn't tear up a check for it. So I think it's important to at least try if it doesn't take too much effort, and it doesn't. Remember too that replacing old age security, you'd have to come up with a further $150,000 of capital by age 65. So in order to avoid or minimize the OAS clawback, we need to adjust the amounts that we withdraw from different sources in order to ensure that your taxable income each year isn't too high. So just to give you an idea, in 2019, the OAS clawback, if the first part of the year is just a little bit under $75,000, and in the later part of the year is a little bit over $75,000. So any income beyond that point, your OAS would be clawed back at 15 cents to the dollar. So from the perspective of wanting to optimize old age security, you want to take out your capital tax effectively. You might want to, take a minimum RIF payment, then some money from your tax-free savings account, and then finally some money from savings, all to sort of aim to have the lowest taxable income possible, which ultimately translates into a higher sustainable budget for a longer period of time. So in summary, striving for the 2 comma club is a wonderful goal, but don't think that just because you have $1 million, that's going to guarantee that you're going to be able to meet your standard of living in retirement. Retirement income planning is way more nuanced than that. Remember, it's critical to understand what you're spending today and try to quantify what you might want to spend in retirement in order to begin to understand how much wealth you need to accumulate. Then these strategies we would use to harvest your wealth and prevent clawbacks of OAS and unnecessary taxation to get you to 100% of your goal. Well, thank you very much for your time and attention today. My name is Monique Madan. I'm the head of financial life strategies at ETF Capital Management and UPotential. UPotential is the fee-for-service arm of the business, and it would be my pleasure to help in any way that I can.